All right, hi there, folks. This is the War Stories podcast on Critical Point, and my name is Kevin Riggle. I run my own little cybersecurity consultancy called Complex Systems Group, and we are here today with Patrick O'Doherty, who is a San Francisco friend of mine, and who has worked in software for many years, to talk about that time he broke production, which is the theme of the War Stories podcast, trying to tell incident stories in public. So, without further ado, we'll roll the titles and get started.
Cool. Great to be here. I'm super excited to tell the time that I broke production, one of many.
Yes. Well, yes, I feel like most of us have a number of these stories, but
yeah,
it's
this one was memorable.
The ones that stick in the mind. Yeah.
It induced nausea.
Okay.
So, like Kevin said, my name is Patrick. I'm a San Francisco-based software engineer. I work at OSO today. We're an authorization solution, a hosted authorization solution, but the story I'm telling dates from a previous life of mine where I worked at Intercom. I had an 8.5-year tenure at Intercom, so and within that, almost 3 different lives. The longest of them was on security, and this story dates to an early event of mine, working on the security team, on what should have been a very, very standard Friday morning. Actually, as I reminisce on my time at Intercom, all of the best Intercom incidents happened on a Friday, just universally. I'm not afraid of deploying on Friday, but just it is an observed phenomenon that all of the best scrambles, all of the most like hair-raising events seem to just come about when the final precipitating like kickoff event happens on an early Friday morning, San Francisco.
Yes. I feel like when I was at Akamai, it was always like I would be finally catching up on email at like 6 p.m. on a Friday, and I would read something in email and I'd be like, oh shit, this is an incident, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just when all of the day's context is like fully like come to you, and you're like, oh, you begin to realize, it dawns on you that actually this is a lot more serious than you first gave it credit.
Yes, exactly.
So just to set a little bit of context, Intercom was then an organization that had engineers split in 2 geographies, primarily Dublin and San Francisco. And we were all hosted in AWS, primarily in US East. And so at the time, what I was working on was a project to provision cloud development environments that were hosted in AWS regions that were geographically proximate to where people were working, but which otherwise worked as a seamless, single network that allowed people to, for example, share a development environment in progress with each other, or to share access to common resources as if they were on the same network. And to do this, it required making what should have been a very straightforward change to the existing VPC CIDR block allocations that we had in US East.
The best kind of change.
Yeah, just like I think all of maybe a dozen lines, not too much, but just enough to get the job done. And this was about a year into Intercom's usage of Terraform. So we had migrated progressively, like more like application specific parts of the stack into Terraform, but we had started by putting all of the like skeletal, VPC config, common security groups, all of that sort of stuff into Terraform. And so the change that I was making was to sort of take a piece of the IP space that we had already like allocated to this VPC, and then otherwise give it out to different regions where we could run workspaces, and that'd be all nice.
And Terraform, since this is at least like theoretically a general audience podcast, or a general computer audience podcast for folks who don't work in the cloud so much, is an infrastructure as code thing where you describe the sort of like AWS resources that you want to exist in the cloud in a like text file on your
Yep.
local device, check it into GitHub, and then go like run a command to that goes and tries to make your AWS look as much like the description you've put in the text file as possible.
Exactly that. Yeah, it's HashiCorp's declarative infrastructure as code tool. So you provide Terraform just a state, a desired state of what you want your infrastructure to look like. It has a state file which it uses to record pointers to whatever cloud resources it's managing under the various name aliases you've given them. And then when you try and run a change, it uses the state, does a evaluation, compares the diff, and then it goes off and it tries to reconcile that. There's a lot of magic in there.
Oh my god, so much magic. Yes.
A lot of magic. And in particular, what was unknown to us at the time was how like what specific behavior we were using loops, or a very like primitive form. Iteration was like a very difficult thing, or not a difficult, but it was like cumbersome in Terraform at the time.
Because it's not really, it's like, because it's declarative, it's not really like, loops are sort of metaprogramming there.
It didn't really fit well into HCL, and it also translated at a very like sort of primitive way into operations. What I mean by that is, so our CIDR block allocations were contained in an array, and the change that I made like reshuffled the contents of the array, and rather this was performed destructively. So to achieve this, Terraform destroyed all of the items in the first array, and then tried to recreate the second array piece by piece by piece.
I see. So this is the array which contains the mapping between like which machine
basically
should
subnet allocations. I think.
Yeah.
It was CIDR blocks to basic something to do with subnet allocations. I can't remember exactly where this loop was, but suffice to say, my CIDR block allocations were conflicting. It was not possible for this loop to complete, and so about halfway through, or about partway through, it failed to create the rest of the array, which meant that all of the remainder, regional availability zones in this region were left without
subnet IPs assigned.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So every deployed host in production suddenly went into a net split where it had just n equals 1.
Okay. So this was for AWS networking then. So Terraform, sort of like Sorcerer's Apprentice style, had helpfully like
it did exactly what it was
removed all of the networking configuration in AWS, and then got halfway through setting up the new one before it was like, whoops, can't do that.
Yeah, it's the perfect mix of factors, because it also, another pet favorite in here is Terraform's validation is very like surface level, because it cannot apply all of the API level validation that actually happens when you make a request to AWS.
Sure.
So it's quite common for you to have backing up, Terraform allows you to create what's called a plan, which is the exact set of operations that it thinks it's going to have to perform to reconcile your existing state to your desired state. And in fact, I believe this plan successfully completed for this change that I had proposed, because from Terraform's perspective, all it had to do was delete this array and then create this new array, and it had all of the inputs that it needed for the new array, and it had no knowledge of what the input arguments were and what their relationship was to each other, and whether there was any logical validation that needed to be applied over that. That was something for the API to do.
Okay,
and when runtime came, sure enough, the API did that.
Right. it compiled, ship it.
Yeah. And so like I think this was a change that I proposed at like 9:30 or 10 o'clock on a Friday morning. The engineer that approved it was a Dublin-based engineer on a sibling infrastructure team who was going out to celebrate, I think, his birthday that evening. So he was just reviewed it on the bus.
Okay.
Looks
And
grand.
Dublin is
Ship it 8 hours ahead.
8 hours ahead. So
Yeah. So
okay,
it's like now
it's
9,
6 p.m.
5,
for
6.
him.
Exactly. He
Yeah.
is the laptop. He does not have it. It is
Right.
on his desk.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and yeah, suddenly the entire like intercom world goes dark
Right.
because
None of these machines can talk to each other.
yeah, nothing in the VPC can talk to each other
Oh.
anymore.
So
Nothing.
so what's in
So
this VPC, which is a sort of like or a
yeah,
sort of structure inside AWS? Is this all of
we've got
Intercom's
all of
everything?
all of Intercom's everything is in this VPC,
Okay.
and suddenly load balancers can't talk to their registered targets. Um, all of
Oof.
the AWS monitoring tools can't reach all of the things that they're supposed to be in charge of. We'll come back to that. That's
Okay.
note that uh, basically all traffic just disappears. There is no response for intercom for a while.
Okay. Intercom is hard down. The whole
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yes.
There's nothing going
Even
on.
even the marketing site.
Possibly not the no. Yeah, depend. You might have hit a cached version of it, but if you had
Okay.
gone to the origin,
Okay. Yeah.
possibly at this stage, you would have still gone to the common hosted infrastructure
Okay.
for all of Intercom's apps.
Got it. Okay. And
So
how
yeah,
many people was Intercom at this point?
in the 400-500 maybe
Okay.
range.
Yeah.
So it's it's a
Yeah.
pretty sizable operation
It's
to
pretty
be just
sizable. Yeah.
suddenly poof.
Hard down. Yeah.
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 Um, Thankfully, mercifully, we had created ahead of time a separate Terraform or separate AWS account where a like full Terraform environment was already provisioned, and so this
Okay.
was ready made for you to perform what we call Terraform surgery, and so
Okay.
it was immediately obvious to us what had happened. Like, oh, everything is now goofed. This change has been
Right.
misapplied. It's like partially applied,
Right.
so it needs to be selectively edited and then just applied forward as quickly as possible.
Okay. Okay.
And
To restore
so
the networking. Yeah.
yeah, and thankfully, we had a practiced break glass mechanism for issuing, an ephemeral SSH certificate to reach this, unique environment that, had the specific, cross account AWS assume role privileges to be able to, reach in, and because you can't administer the account from the inside now, like pretty much everything networked wise is goofed,
Okay.
right? So this has to be done externally.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, and so you were running this from inside AWS, inside your VPC, and so
we had three AWS accounts in play here. There's like the prod where everything
okay.
is and everything's
Yeah.
going on. There was
Yeah.
Terraforms to keep the snake from eating itself. There
Yes.
was a
Yes.
Terraform account separately for manipulating production, and then
Okay.
there was a Terraform emergency separate
Break
account which
glass.
had
Oh,
like a
okay.
break glass mechanism where there was
Nice.
just like an auto-scaling group of n=1 that had Terraform checked out and ready to go, and you could that instance profile had the necessary credentials to be able to perform whatever manipulations would be necessary for you to rectify whatever was going on.
Great. Okay. I think my experience of Terraform was like running it on my local laptop, and so then it's a little different world. But
Yeah, we really wanted to move away from people running it locally early
yeah.
on. Just it's the only way to keep it in any way sensible or under wraps.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, this environment had the IAM credentials necessary. It had access to the S3 state bucket, all of that to be able, and Vim and other things installed, so you could do literal state file surgery or
Oh.
whatever was necessary. I mean, I don't believe
Yeah.
that this was necessary in this incident, but definitely there were times where this place was used to do some real. There's a GIF from Indiana Jones where he's trying to swap out
Oh
a skull
yes.
for a dummy weight, and
Yes. Yes.
really,
Yes.
really, I empathize with that moment a great
Oh
deal.
yes. Yes.
From experiences with Terraform.
When you're in a text editor editing your like the internal representation of your tool's understanding of the world, that in order to convince it,
Yeah,
that the world isn't either the way that it is or trick it in a useful way, that is a very, 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 that's, yeah.
and you're just like trying to get past safety mechanisms as quickly as possible to get to the thing that you want to do,
Right,
because you have a very sure understanding of what's wrong.
right,
And safety things couldn't prevent you from getting there, and they're sure as hell not going to like rectify it. You just want direct action to get it done.
right. Yes, yes.
So yeah, thankfully this was already at hand, and
Yeah,
I
that's
think it
good.
took us
Yes.
about maybe 15 minutes to go from 10 15 minutes to go from, oh, what has happened here,
Yeah.
uh, because the Terraform application that did this was automated. It had been triggered by a merge
Oh,
that
okay.
once this pull request had gone in. So
Oh, I see. Oh,
uh,
so there's CI/CD happening,
exactly.
continuous
So
integration, continuous deployment. So you like make the pull request, you get it reviewed, you get it
yep.
approved,
So
it
the
passes local
Terraform plan,
tests.
yeah, was
Right.
posted as a GitHub comment. You approve that, and
Okay.
then
Yep.
you're signing off these changes are the things that
Oh,
are going to
that's
happen
nice.
in respect. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
If you tried to approve something before the comment was there, it would reject your approval.
Nice.
So
Nice.
it was really really yeah, it was very
Somebody built some
productive.
nice automation around this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Nice.
there was a fair amount of homegrown tooling around it. A couple of different CLIs that like performed all of the application of this. The CI/CD workers were orchestrated using BuildKite, and
Okay.
they were hosted in this separate AWS account. So this
Oh, got
was
it. Okay.
a
Hence why
way
you
for
needed
us to,
this.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so this
Separate
was a way
AWS
for us to
infrastructure.
have, separation and the
Yeah.
CI/CD flows, but like
Oh man.
still have all of the access that we wanted in terms of, assume role, being able to provision things, and then having this third account where we can just sort of duck in when needs be,
Yeah.
and do the changes. Yeah, it
Nice.
was highly productive.
Yeah.
One of the like better. Uh, I was always very happy to show it off, and
Yeah.
proud to speak of it to people, because
Nice.
it was a very productive way of working.
Nice.
So yeah, so about 10 or 15 minutes to go from delayed reaction of like what's going on,
Right.
because the
What was
more
the first thing you noticed? Like, what was the first, like, wait, what? Kind of
um,
signal.
I mean, just like the more unusual response of like zero, like your application has become a black hole. Like it's not
Okay.
even, it's not you're not getting 500s. You're getting nothing. You are met with silence. So I
Okay.
think
Yeah.
it was pretty, uh, ominous and all at once
Yeah.
as an event.
Was
The
that
more common thing is that an application change went out, like a code change went out because it was
hmm
hundreds of them a day, and like something there, met reality that it hadn't anticipated and started, creating a huge amount of errors. Like that. That's the more common
Yeah.
case, and that was, almost automated. But
Okay.
this was just like the app accidentally, and it's no longer there.
Right. Yeah.
None of it.
Right. So did you like start hearing, like somebody ping you in Slack, being like, "Hey, I see you just, did a
Did we
change."
accidentally the app?
Yeah. Did we
Yeah,
accidentally the entire app? Yes.
I was present in the office, and I
Okay.
think this infrastructure change hit everything. So
Yeah.
internal back of house applications that were being
Oh.
used by people were like
Okay. You're like,
also hit by this. So like this is real, you
yeah.
know,
I can't.
down tools. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Serious. So you're like, I can't log into the like employee portal or whatever.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
The back of house like CS tools would have been down
Yeah.
simultaneously.
Yeah.
The only other time that I've actually caused a down tool situation like this was when I was previously responsible for the San Francisco office internet and
Okay.
made like actually a routing table
Yep. Oh
update.
my
So
god. Yep.
never again. That was
Networking is hard. Networking, as a friend of mine put it, had his signature put it, one letter away from not working.
yeah. It's doing like networking updates up a ladder,
Ooh.
one-handed in front of a room of people while
Oh,
sweating profusely, just like
yes.
wanting to disappear from everybody's observation.
Yes. Yes. Oh man.
Terrifying stuff.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, this again was like, hey, everything is broken.
Yeah.
There's nothing going on here, and also, all of the usual diagnostics were met with complete silence. There wasn't
Okay.
anything
Yeah.
coming back. So it was
Yeah.
pretty obvious that something, and we had made the change. It had been published
Right.
in Slack, so it was like, hey, this is probably relevant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so so anyway, we got about 15 minutes later, we got back to signs of life again.
Yeah.
Load balancers are beginning to register targets and autoscaling groups. Things are like spinning up, and we're beginning to see normalization.
Okay.
But very shortly after that, people log into the application. And some context. So Intercom is a communications platform that
Yeah.
businesses use to interact with customers, and one of the primary interfaces that people spend their day in is what's known as the inbox. So it's a multiplayer, real-time inbox that takes in all of the conversations that you receive from multiple streams, and then you interact with them.
So this is
Um,
where people might have most interacted with this is like that little chat support widget in the bottom
exactly.
right of a
Yeah.
lot of
So
websites now is like powered. A lot of them are intercom powered.
Mhm. So that's the single player version of Intercom, as you will. You're
Okay.
speaking
Yes.
to, one business, but on the far side of that, there is, somebody at the business that you're speaking to, and they have a
Right.
one-to-many,
Right.
interface, much like your Gmail inbox or something else, where they can
Right.
have multiple conversations going in real time.
Zendesk. So what the customer support rep experience is, for
Exactly, yeah. So
example, or yeah.
the business side of that is is
Yeah.
what's known as the inbox, which is this
Yeah.
like big, information rich place where a
Yeah.
lot of real-time updates are happening.
Yeah.
Um, and that inbox makes very heavy use of an Elasticsearch cluster
Okay.
that is fed real-time updates that are tailed as an operation log from Intercom's API. So changes to state such as a user event being tracked or a new attribute being added to a profile. These are caught in a like operation log from Dynamo, I believe, at the time, and were replicated into a Elasticsearch
Interesting.
cluster.
Interesting. So these are what are these are like so these are like API level changes that are happening on the platform, and you generate.
Yeah,
Uh,
so you might example that if you're widgets.com and you have a user profile for Kevin and Patrick, and an attribute on that might be the number of widgets that they've bought. And so when either of us makes a purchase, widgets.com will update the, n widgets purchased to 3 or whatever. And that is the sort of thing that you might have a congratulations auto message triggered on within Intercom. So a big focus of Intercom's messaging is that you could create profiles based on data attributes. So when people have crossed through a particular threshold of number of actions taken, or when their profile attributes match specific key values, or other conditions, that you could use those as a trigger for some other behavior, namely
okay.
sending events of some form. So maybe a
Sure.
tutorial or feedback, or and
An email being like, "Thank you on being a loyal customer
exactly,
for
yeah.
yeah."
Or we
Okay.
see that you've used this 5 times without success. Like what are we doing wrong? Like that,
Right.
great, all that sort of. It's like the core mechanic of intercom, right?
Yeah.
Is this behavior-based messaging in the messenger, and all of this, and all of that is centered around this Elasticsearch cluster, both
Okay.
for the you being able to search through the real-time contents of conversations coming in.
Right.
That's like one, maybe 50% of it, and the other half of it was the profile data that I spoke about, and specifically, uh, Intercom had at the very, very last thing that happened for any outbound automated message was a check against the real-time search indices to see that you still matched all of the conditions, because
Okay.
data is
Right.
far from perfect, and there might be cases where you just marginally dipped into a condition, or you might be flapping, or like this. It was very, very important to have this final check, right? Because also you could have an expansive fan out process that might have taken a while, and so people's data might have gone stale. So if you did a fan out to all of your active customers in North America 5 hours ago,
Okay.
and then somebody isn't active anymore or whatever, then you don't want them to get that email. So effectively, this is like there's some breakage in the fan out, because
Okay.
people might not match a particular attribute anymore. They might maybe a region has changed or a state has changed, so they don't match the filter, and you don't want them to get that message.
Right. Okay. And so what's doing this final check? Is that Elasticsearch or?
Yeah. So the basis of that last check is the Elasticsearch was used as one component in the basis of that last check. So there was both a front of house and a back of house, two very, very heavy components that used Elasticsearch. One that drove all of the interactions that people saw when they were working on conversations. And the other was effectively a gating mechanism on any outbound automated messaging. So you could still do one-to-one transactional stuff, but all of your daily automated heavy email,
I see,
that required a lot. All of those emails as they were going out did a last minute validation that the triggers that the message was being queued up on still matched the user, so that we didn't send nonsense.
Right. So this is the Elasticsearch cluster, which is dedicated basically to this cron system that is used for
So it has there's two clusters, and they're both used, like one front of house and one back of house. And shortly after things begin to reappear online, we start to get user reports that there's no search results in the inbox. There's just nothing there. It's
and
empty.
What is the change that you've made which is causing things to come back online? This is where you went into the Terraform and...
I just reverted my prospective CIDR block allocations and said, not today. We'll do that some other day. We'll go back to the known good state. And so I just put everything back as it was previously. And so hosts that were in the same region, sub-region, availability zone, and terminology soup in AWS. All of those, availability zones were given back their old allocations, and we went back to as it was.
Got it. Okay. So this was a case where you could kind of roll back to a good state. Terraform, you give it back the old config. It looks at the current state of the world. It's like, oh my god! It goes and deletes all of the networking again, and recreates it back the way that it originally was. And traffic starts flowing finally.
Yeah. So every server that previously couldn't see any other server can now see everybody again.
Great. Okay.
So
problem solved, right?
Yeah. So ostensibly, yes. For a sweet, blissful moment there, it looks like we've escaped from what should be, a pretty gnarly incident without much in the way of issue.
Only 15 minutes of downtime, which is not great, but if you weren't trying to use the app for those 15 minutes, you never noticed. Except now you're getting user reports that they're like, there's no search results here.
And other signs of life, outbound activity alarms are beginning to show. Queues are getting backed up because messages that should be fanning out and sending on a regular basis are now no longer. So simultaneously you have these two pressures beginning to build, and they all center around this Elasticsearch.
Is it both Elasticsearches that are having problem, the front of house and the back of house one? So that's weird.
We get these reports that things are broken, and then when you look into them, it appears that Elasticsearch is the culprit.
The common mode failure. Or I mean, what I'm getting from this is that these two Elasticsearches are both they're separate because you don't want search going down to affect the the sending of these automated messages, but in this case there's something in common. Maybe
there's some common component to them. So Intercom was such a heavy consumer of Elasticsearch at various points that it was like a staffed role within the infrastructure team.
Elasticsearch
to run it as a internal service
keeper.
So in this case, all of the infrastructure that was used for this stuff was communal, front and back.
Interesting.
And
so somebody's responsible for both of these Elasticsearch clusters. Cool.
And so we look into it, and what's odd is, Elasticsearch is there, when you address it, it's there. The same host that was there is there.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. Um, and but then we look a little bit closer. We get network proximity to them and start making some diagnostic requests, and it
Hmm.
begins to show us that like while it is green, the cluster status is green, all of those alarms are a-okay. It
Mm-hmm.
is entirely empty. There is not
Oh,
there is not a drop of data in it.
okay.
Um,
And there was data in it before this happened.
there
Yeah.
was quite a lot. There was
Where'd
quite
it
a
go?
lot. Yeah. So mystery.
Mm-hmm.
The uptime for these hosts is not very high. In fact,
Okay.
it's equal to the like the event horizon or the event time rather. So,
Right. Okay.
um, what's going on there? We
That's yeah.
and look a little bit further, and so the team that was managing Elasticsearch was using AWS OpsWorks to do so.
Okay. I've never heard
And
of this, which is not at all surprising in AWS world. It has so many products, but what is
yeah, it
OpsWorks?
is a server. It's a server orchestration product.
Okay. Okay.
I am myself not hugely familiar with it because
Okay.
its use was very limited at Intercom. So Intercom had its own infrastructure orchestration and application deployment system that was
Okay.
called Muster,
Okay.
and I can
Nice.
only liken Muster as like the family dog that ate a bunch of batteries and never looked at you the same again, but you loved them
Okay.
just like all the same because like faults and everything, they were just like Muster was your dog. Like
Yes. Yes. Yes.
um,
Yeah. Well,
everybody loved Muster.
that's
Uh,
infrastructure stuff like that is like once you start with it, you're never moving away from it. You're just
yeah,
yeah.
and it was like it is as old as Intercom because it was
Right.
a like boss created code base. It was like created originally
Oh.
by the like VP of engineering,
Oh,
and
even better.
it like
Yes.
predates so many different other orchestration tools that came subsequently.
For sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so Muster is the thing that Intercom uses exclusively, but the thing that deploys Muster itself was OpsWorks. And
Okay.
so, you spot the turtles all the way down.
Yes.
So there needed
Yes.
to be something that was in charge of keeping some, because Muster was ultimately had like a fleet of workers that,
Sure.
took a job queue and did the things. And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
something needed to make sure that those were always running because that was the basis by which other manipulations would happen, like code would get deployed or a rollback would happen or
Right.
X,
Right.
Y, and Z.
Okay.
Um,
And so Muster was responsible for like the production services, whereas Terraform was responsible
like
for
the
infrastructure.
auto-scaling groups that hosted those services. Yeah,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
Muster was more responsible for taking your merges to main
Okay.
and
Yeah.
bundling that up and putting it on the hosts that
Got it.
were orchestrated and otherwise organized by Terraform.
Got it. Okay.
Um,
CI/CD for the production service and
yeah,
and I'm assuming that Muster also does things like checks to see if a service pings and then reboots it if it doesn't.
yeah, exactly. Muster was effectively like a very like thick layer on top of autoscaling groups.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Manipulating autoscaling groups and using the like healthy host count and other triggers from various things pointing at them.
Okay.
So like
Okay.
a web cluster would just translate to an autoscaling group that maybe had a load balancer attached or other things associated with it, and then
Okay.
Muster would just manage that. And there was hundreds of autoscaling groups just logically grouped into the applications, and
Sure.
then they would be deployed communally. So
Okay.
the Intercom Rails codebase would go out to the various 100 or so, 150 or so clusters
Right.
that were
Right.
doing various web fleets or backgrounds or cron or whatever.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But as a separate concern, OpsWorks was the thing that was like the most core infrastructure orchestration tool,
Yeah.
beneath it all, right? Where it was used by the infrastructure team to deploy the things that they made available as a service to other parts of Intercom.
Got it.
And because
Okay.
they didn't want to, there had been prior Muster deploys itself adventures,
Yes.
and we didn't want to
Yes.
revisit them. OpsWorks was the thing that did it instead.
Okay. Yeah.
And so OpsWorks was running these Elasticsearch because this is prior to AWS managed anything in
Okay.
the Elasticsearch world. So
Oh, interesting. Okay.
this is we are running Elasticsearch.
Right. Yeah. Okay. On some EC2 boxes
Yep.
with
Yeah. We are responsible for it all year round, not just for Christmas. Like
yes.
we are
Yes.
doing this.
Yes.
And so OpsWorks is the thing that's responsible for those hosts.
Mm-hmm.
And um, OpsWorks, in its wisdom, so its perspective of the event, when we
Mm-hmm.
go back to, t equals 0, is
Yeah.
that the systems that it was managing disappeared.
Right. Yes.
It
Can't
could
ping
see
them.
them. Yeah, it couldn't make any direct connection to them. It
Health
could
check
see
fails.
them in
Okay.
the AWS like host
Yes. API.
enumeration, right? Because
Yeah.
like everything is still there, but it can't see them.
Right.
So its next best idea is to reboot the host.
Kick them. Yes.
So it's just its first thing is like,
Yep.
good old
Kill it
kick
and.
them. Yeah.
Yep.
What we don't know, and we only subsequently discover, is that the disks that are used as the basis for the like index storage are ephemeral, which means
Ah.
that this rebooting empties them. They
Right. They're
like
gone.
yeah, they're gone.
They're gone. You are never. Is this? So you're not using EBS volumes, the Elastic Block Store volumes attached to these EC2 instances for storing this data, which is good because EBS still hasn't fixed their the P99 latency problem is like an hour. You go to make a file system request and it's just like come back after lunch, and you're like,
I need it now.
I need it. Like I'm running a database. I assume that that's why, or something similar is why you're doing this. So you're doing this on instant storage,
Yep.
which goes away when
Exactly.
Yes. Okay.
So, we have the same number of instances that we had previously. They're just like carrying a lot less data.
Right. Yes.
And this has happened everywhere. So like this is a
Right.
communal configuration issue for how this template of Elasticsearch instance is running
Okay,
and being
yes,
managed
yes,
by OpsWorks. So
yes.
every Elasticsearch cluster across the company right now is pristine,
Gone.
unsullied
It's
by
empty.
any
Yes.
data, just
Yes.
like
Poof.
yeah.
Poof.
Completely poof.
Yes. Okay. Woof. Was this the first time that this had happened?
I think it was the first. Yeah, I think it was the first time that we had like had a an Elasticsearch server.
Okay.
Light.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It was at this point when I saw like empty indices that I like was very nauseous, like
Yes.
because it
Yes.
was unclear what the recovery time
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
to we're talking like a billion or more user documents to put into this index. So
Yeah.
to recreate something, there are systems that become, I think the term is like semi-stable, where they're
Yes.
like technically operating and
Right.
responding to queries, but they're
Yeah.
past a point of sustainable operation because once they exit that envelope, there's no recovery.
Right. Yeah.
And we had entered that moment.
And so the Elasticsearch clusters aren't the source of truth for this data. The source of truth is the dynamo, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there is at least the theoretical possibility. Like the data still exists somewhere, and it's just not in a useful form.
Yes.
Yes. Well, that's yeah.
Yeah, and
Better than the
thankfully, so
alternative.
the backing story of the Dynamo use, prior to that, so I joined Intercom in 2013, and when I joined, Intercom's primary document store was Mongo.
Okay. Love it.
Yeah, I mean, just oodles and bundles of fun.
Yes. Yes.
And so the one of the basically with respect to the contents of user documents, Intercom doesn't quite care all that much, and actually it would prefer to keep each customer's user documents in its own domain. But what is useful and necessary to keep is a unique identity index of like different identifiers that have been used in different workspaces across Intercom, and then index those into specific documents. So it's not necessarily to query across documents so much.
Okay.
Certainly not globally. What is necessary is like unique identity index management within a workspace.
Okay.
And that plus rich document manipulation is like kind of the thing that's hard to square. So Intercom ended up making use of both Aurora RDS plus Dynamo to square this circle. So like the literal index for identity, like what unique identities exist in what workspace shard, like what customer shard or what user ID or email or etc. What specific unique document identifier that translates to. That was all maintained in RDS.
Okay.
And then all of the, like, Dynamo got to do all of its great thing with respect to, keeping this like less structured data.
Got it. Okay, so
yeah.
So you're using a relational database to do relational database things, so that you can do things both across customers. I think I'm
So not across customers.
not across customers.
Basically, Intercom wanted a large, expansive document store that was amenable to the access patterns of many different customers.
Okay.
But that also we didn't have to run.
Right. Yes.
And that was found in Dynamo, but what was not found in Dynamo was the ability to also maintain the unique identity index that was necessary to perform certain like application level features.
Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah.
It was the combination of the two as like one like API. So
right. Okay. Yeah.
That from a developer's perspective gave people both. So this became abstracted as like a document store for developers to work on.
Great.
And they just got to write things into it, and like
the
identities were taken care of.
A document store where you can pull up a user by their email address easily
in a shard.
A shard. Yeah, without, because like if you haven't, in a regular document store, what is it? If you haven't, it doesn't really have indexes. You've got the key and then, a huge JSON, blob. And so if the ability to go from something user, human readable, human understandable, like an email address, to that giant blob requires some additional machinery on top of it. Okay.
And so, this was the best of both worlds for
absolutely.
Us.
Yes, we must have had a similar thing at Stripe, because there's, no way we were going to sit there iterating through all bajillion customers, to find the one with the right email address.
It actually it leaves RDS to do a very relational database job in a very highly performant way. It's you actually rock at this.
Yes.
I'm very happy to use you.
Yes.
It'll scale to whatever capacity I care about.
Right.
And Dynamo, for its part, was like upholding the operational simplicity and less toil, which was a big thing, because previously operating Mongo in any capacity was just was very, very difficult. It was just particularly at the scale that Intercom wanted to do it. It was just very challenging. And the final piece of that puzzle was connecting it into some good search infrastructure.
Right.
So this was like the oplog bit that I spoke about earlier. So
this is where Elasticsearch comes in. Yes.
Yeah, the changes that were being fed into user documents and other things going on in Dynamo ultimately made their way as changes into Elasticsearch.
Got it. Okay.
And this Elasticsearch was the basis for search for all users that are in Canada but that have purchased 5 widgets and who use Chrome.
Right.
And that last logged in a week ago, or more.
Yeah.
This is Elasticsearch's game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, yes, it loves that.
So you just got to, in many ways, use the right tool for the right job. Like slice and dice.
Yeah. And then you're providing unified interface to it via the APIs and via the Yeah.
This was only really possible because Intercom was a large monolith Rails code base where it was possible to do this by convention, because it certainly wasn't going to be possible to do it by convention in a multi repo, unless you had other tooling. We barely managed it with the custom bash scripts that were just grep and other things that forbid you from using anti-patterns and directed you to use something else instead.
Right. Yes.
We would grep for any direct document store sublayer usage, except that in these blessed files, forgive you or forbid you from using or allowing you to check your code in if you hit it, because we're like, hey, please go through the one door that we have prepared for you, because otherwise we're going to lose track.
Yes. It's the spaghetti that would result.
Yeah. So, to great fortune, about 6 months prior, a lot of this work had come to fruition, and so there was one of the semi-stable states that Intercom had prior was recovering from Elasticsearch outage, because in the Mongo world, it was really slow.
Yeah.
And it was thought that the setup that we could create in Dynamo would allow us to have a way quicker recovery.
Okay.
And that work had only come to be done about a couple of months prior.
Okay. So somebody was like, I'm really concerned that if we lose these elastic searches, we're like, because it's what I think I'm hearing is that these elastic searches have a searchable version of the op log back to the beginning of time, or pretty much.
They have a searchable history of the current document for.
Oh, okay.
Not over each individual operation, but just like what is the current form of the document, which is represented.
Got it.
Which is like the baked representation of the op log.
Got it. Okay. So the op log is what's keeping that state up to date, and then so you need some way to get all of the documents from Dynamo into Elasticsearch, so that they can be searched.
Some changes that are going on
Plus
right now.
the changes. This process will not be instantaneous, or even if it was, you don't want to or you could stop. Dynamo, stop all changes in Dynamo until you finish this process. But no, that's terrible. So you send it over, and then you start streaming the op log immediately, and eventually it will catch up to real time.
Yeah. So we got extremely lucky that we had only. Go back to your question. This is something that we had identified as an organizational risk, that Elasticsearch was now growing sort of too big to be managed, or that a recovery would be painful if and when it happened.
Right. Well, here you are.
And so this was, like I said, about 6 months after this work had finally come to close, that we had drilled some, the other team had drilled the
Elasticsearch team.
Had drilled a recovery to this, and on that day it worked. Not to say that it was quick, but I think it was something about, I think it was 10 hours.
Okay. Not what you wanted to spend the Friday doing.
No,
and into the evening.
But certainly it would have been days. Although it would have been days, or possibly I don't know that it was bound or there was, you're getting into multiplying it like this is naive. It's clear that there's something is going to wreck me about halfway doing this job if I just tell you a projection of this thing multiplied by 4 days. There's some other bound here that is not immediately visible that's going to completely wreck us. We were able to get back to partial states of recovery a little bit quicker, but back to our reality, in the documents, or it matches the tallied reality of everything that happened. I think was in and around the 10-hour mark.
Okay. And was this basically just taking a dump from the Dynamo and
I believe now this is where my details will get a little bit more hazy, but I believe this was based on pretty decent snapshotting that we had. Okay. So we had some ability to recover from some more recent point in time and play a shorter form of the log, because
okay, so there was some backups of the Elasticsearch. Thank goodness.
This was the reason that this was honestly the last bit of sort of Intercom's data puzzle, as it were, clicking into place, because there had always been parts of prior to that there had always been parts of the platform that it felt like we were building Wallace and Gromit out ahead of us.
Yeah. I mean,
not
classic.
Necessarily. Yeah, I mean,
classic hypergrowth. Yeah.
A success in startups is getting to replace the old jank that you built 5 years ago.
Yes. Or 6 months ago. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Or having earned the opportunity to come back and replace it, because I think we oftentimes will strive for perfection first time out, but perfection is
always a mistake.
Gonna get you always to the next thing. Pragmatism is required to really optimize your time utilization, and do the thing that's worthwhile, and then reevaluate.
Yeah, I mean, you're always sort of in startup land. You're always sort of 6 months away from going out of business, or at least not being able to raise the next round, and so it's
Yeah, and the one thing that you have, that nobody else has is like focus on your idea, like the thing
Yeah.
that you can do, but it
Yes.
actually requires you to do that rather than getting distracted and everything else that anybody else can do.
Yeah.
Like anybody can build, the more generic, perfect CI/CD thing
Right.
to ship an
Right.
app that's rubbish.
Right. Yeah. 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 You're not. Are you a
uh,
CI/CD company? No. Don't
yeah.
stop that. Yes.
I think that was there was definitely a strong sense of that sort of pragmatism
Yeah.
practiced at Intercom as one of
Great.
the engineering values that I was most like happy to be around for so long. It was one that definitely rubbed off on me.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. So was that the end of the incident? You recover
Yeah,
the
that
Elasticsearch and
was
then okay.
we recovered Elasticsearch, and then people's messages that were queued, because well, also like message fan out was based on search material, right? So
Okay. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
there was sort of like a two-phase break here where new messages couldn't be found out
Right.
because we couldn't do the search to ID expansion.
Yep.
And then the check-in, the final stage of sending a message couldn't complete because even all of the jobs that had been queued, they wouldn't be able to do that like final validation to see like, hey,
Right.
do you still match these starting conditions?
Got it.
So
Okay.
that was just like a complete stasis,
Right.
and messages built up over time. So
Yep.
this was, people are still queuing their days worth of stuff to happen.
Right. Okay.
We unfortunately we can't replay everything.
Sure.
People might have gone in and out of conditions, and that's like, one of the like operationally, Intercom was quite a complicated product, or maybe it was quite rich in terms of the functionality that it provided, and that
Yeah.
translated into a lot of requirements to be pretty sensitive to data changes and schedule things. And
Yeah.
if the moment has passed, also with respect to like a pop-up message that needs to happen on a page or other things,
Right.
it's either it's a hit in a very small fraction of time or a miss entirely.
Yeah.
And so the loss of this like search capacity was definitely a big hit for those hours. And then also the inbox, the in-house side of people who are working, they need to look up for other conversations related to broken widgets. They can't do that because search is down. This is also like really getting in the way of, they're measured on conversations they close
Right.
an hour
Yeah.
or other, measures of efficiency that really are, very straining. And so, the
Yeah.
idea that this tool isn't working like gets in the way of them. So
Yeah.
it was definitely
Yeah.
like
It wasn't just down tools for Intercom; it was down tools for all of Intercom's customers, which
it
is
was pretty sizable.
Yeah.
The like conversation index came back much quicker, so people
Okay.
were able to resume, the business side of getting through their conversation backlog and interacting with
Okay.
people more quickly.
That's
It was
right.
the outbound message,
Yeah.
because like the document
Right.
store for people have way more users than they have conversations with their users.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because
So
support
just
requests
like
are relatively rare, but
yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
This like large, billion plus document store, had to be all just like pushed back into Elasticsearch and
Okay.
gelled into shape.
And so once Elasticsearch gets back up with all the data in there, now there's another queue that has to process with all of the like messages that or all of the like jobs which are running to be like, okay, do I, queue up all. Can I send? Queuing up all the messages to send, and then there's a fourth queue. I think we're on fourth queue of like, okay, actually going and sending those messages, and so okay, woof.
Yeah, so just like this whole, it's like a complex system, right? Just like comes back to life.
Yeah.
And
then presumably like a bunch of people got in to work on Monday at your customers to a like pile of like responses to these messages or like things that hadn't processed and got to go through that.
I'm sure that there were ramifications that that happened on Monday. I remember being pretty well frazzled by the Friday's activities.
Yeah,
it was a good one
because you closed up like maybe 8 p.m.
Yeah, it was definitely was a late. Um, we had three different offices, so we had Dublin, San Francisco, and London all participating in
Okay.
this incident response on
Oh
like
goodness.
multiple Zooms, or sorry, multiple Hangouts.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
was actually one of the better incident coordinations that I had seen, even
Okay.
with three locations going on, because it was possible to divide the problem into like a per cluster or per. The
Mm.
clusters were like logically broken up into different application areas,
Okay.
so and they oftentimes had different product teams that were the consumers of that. So it was easy for us to say like, hey, this this cluster, you go do that, like the instructions are the same for everybody,
Okay.
but we have a local everybody's like a local responder with respect to their team, which
Right.
allows us to fan out the work.
Okay.
Um,
That's nice.
yeah,
Being able to kind of swarm the problem with, everybody like restoring their own local setup. That's nice. Like, yeah. Okay. And I don't know. I kind of enjoy those. It's like everybody pitching in on a thing. It can like actually be really fun once you've
yeah,
figured out what needs to be done and are just in the process of doing it. And then like,
yep. I mean, I think it's a really over the potency is maybe getting watered down a bit, but ownership as a term, like when practiced and you actually give people sort of
yeah,
the tools,
yeah,
and you don't hide them away, or you don't like it was a team's responsibility to run this infrastructure and to make it excellent.
yeah,
It wasn't their responsibility to keep it in an ivory tower or away from
right,
people, or
yeah,
um, in fact, the internal, you know, like career growth for people who maybe wanted to like grow into ops or grow into something, or vice versa, was quite strong. So
nice,
the
yeah,
more you get to show people, the more likely it is that they might take an interest.
right, yeah, yeah. And so, were you managing this incident? Did you have an incident manager? Or...
Thankfully, we had an incident manager. Yeah, the
Okay,
director of
nice.
engineering at the time
Oh,
was
nice. Okay,
like a seasoned SRE from Facebook and Amazon and
okay, nice.
some Irish groups back in the day. So yeah,
Nice.
the intercom office was had quite a lot of SRE. The intercom office in Dublin, in particular, had like quite a lot of hired SRE talent from the FANGs. So for people who don't
Yeah.
know the like geo geopolitical history of like how the internet has spread into the world, like the European Union and the fact that Ireland speaks, so the European Union, the euro currency, and the fact that Ireland speaks English, where no other eurozone country in Europe uh, does, meant that in the late 1980s and early 1990s, there was a huge amount of foreign investment, particularly from American multinationals in Ireland as an expansive basis for their European operations. So quite a lot of American tech companies have their European headquarters in Dublin, and for example, like Google started there in the early 2000s,
Okay. Yeah.
and a lot of the initial offices that they had out there were not product development offices.
Hmm.
I can still remember the rare old times of the 2010s where there was like, oh, product, designed in California,
Right.
like
Yes. Yes.
operated in Dublin,
Yes. Yes.
maybe, but designed in California. So a lot of the offices that were built out there by Facebook, Google, and such were very SRE focused
Oh,
for all
okay.
of their
Nice.
European and onward data center operations. So
Okay.
this was like
Yeah.
talent that was like very, very like heavily represented in
Nice.
Dublin, and was possible for us to hire in.
Patrick, this has been really lovely. Where can
It's been
people
super fun.
find you on the internet?
I can be found at patrickod.computer, which is a little homepage that I'm building at the moment. And I am on Mastodon at infosec.exchange/patrickod, or at patrickod. However, I don't know, how does one verbally describe your Mastodon
I think it's like an
presence?
email address, like patrickod
Yeah,
at
there you go.
infosec.exchange, but
Pat,
not
I don't
actually an
know.
email address, which is
Yep,
confusing. And
it's
yeah.
it's linked from patrickod.computer,
Okay.
so
Brilliant.
that's
Yes.
that's a good place to go.
Great. Yes. Yeah. Any parting thoughts?
Um, I don't know. Stay humble with computers.
Oh.
They'll trick you. They'll
Yes.
trick you.
Yes.
And Yeah, no, stay humble. Computers, they will trick
They
you,
will trick
but
you.
have fun.
Yes. Yes.
Do have fun. And as serious as computers can be, it's people at the end of the day that matter.
Yes. Yes, indeed. This has been the War Stories podcast on Critical Point. I'm Kevin Riggle. This is Patrick O'Doherty, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked that, please like and subscribe down below. We're just getting the channel and the podcast series going, and it helps a lot to know that people want to hear more. If you have an incident story you'd be willing to tell here, please email us at hello@complexsystems.group. That goes double if you aren't a cis white dude. We're great and have great incident stories, and other people are also great and also have great incident stories. It often helps to say out loud that we're looking for as many voices as we can, so if that describes you, please shoot us an email. Also, since Twitter, I mean X, but okay, who am I really kidding? Since Twitter are in the news again, if you worked at Twitter and you have an incident story you'd like to tell from your time there, we'd especially like to hear from you. You can find me on Twitter as @KevinRiggle and on Mastodon @KevinRiggle@IOC.exchange. My consulting company, Complex Systems Group, is on the web at complexsystems.group. And with that, folks, till next time.